Hello, today we are very excited to welcome a special guest, Mark Daoust, who is the founder and CEO of Quiet Light Brokerage, which specializes in multi-million dollar website sales. So we're very excited to have you here, Mark. What we'd love to do is get some of your insights into the market right now, and potentially some opportunities and things that you're seeing. So thank you so much for being with us.
Big
Hey,
thank
thanks so
you
much
for
for
coming
inviting
along.
me into your community. I'm really excited to be here, talk to you guys. It's going to be a fun conversation. So I'm honored to be
I think
invited.
it is.
I think it is.
Because there is some exciting stuff happening in website world, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, what are you seeing at the moment? So you've grown your brokerage phenomenally over the last 14 years. What's the biggest trends that you're seeing over that time, certainly in terms of growth of valuations potentially, or even just the market?
Sure. So I've been doing this for 14 years now, as of 2021, right? So 14 years, and I can easily say this is the hottest market I've seen in 14 years. To give you just a barometer of that. In June of this year, we will close. I'm going to have one person close roughly $25 million worth of transactions for the month. If you go back to 2014 and 2015, we did $17 million for the year as a company. Right. So the growth in this space, obviously the company itself is growing extraordinarily rapidly. We've been doing this again for a long time. But this market right now has had, it's been like a witch's brew of perfect things going together to create this incredible concoction that we have right now, which is a really, really hot marketplace. And it's definitely a seller's market. It's a good market to be in right now. It won't last forever. Nothing like this does. But I think there's a lot of trends that maybe we can probably take away from this as far as what does it look like going forward, right now, and also maybe when there's a pullback, and also what's going into some of these trends. I will let you ask the questions because I will just start riffing on that.
Well, interestingly, because we'd love to have your insight. Do you have a feeling what's driving this growth? What are the factors? Why is this happening?
Because you get to see behind the scenes. You're working with these presumably big buyers, and we'll ask that in a minute as well. But what's your thoughts? What's driving it, particularly over this last, say, 1 to 2 years?
Sure. Again, there's a lot of things that have gone together that have created sort of this explosion in the marketplace. One of the things has been the pandemic, right? Whereas for most businesses, the pandemic has been really bad. For the online world, it's been very good because people were home. I'm not revealing anything new here, but this has resulted in a lot of people moving to online shopping habits, moving to more online behavior. Zoom is a household name, whereas a year ago, before the pandemic, it was not, right? It was big, it was well known in business circles, but it certainly wasn't a household name. So what happened, we always knew the online world was going to gain further adoption. What the pandemic did is it took a cinder block and stomped on the accelerator and didn't let go, right? Now where we're at is we're waiting and we're seeing, okay, the pandemic in much of the world is starting to subside. There's still hot spots, as we're having this conversation, but we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So what does the world look like post-pandemic? And everyone that I talk to, my opinion as well, is that we'll see somewhat of a drawback. The floor is significantly higher. User adoption, user comfort of the online world is higher than it was pre-pandemic, right? And that part's not going away. So what causes boom? One, just the businesses have grown like crazy. Second of all, before the pandemic, we were seeing institutional money increasingly cast its gaze over at the online world. Previously it had casted its gaze pretty skeptically, right? How do we size these businesses up? How stable are they? How do we assess them? How do we grow them? There were certain marketplaces or certain verticals like SaaS that were getting institutional money and were growing rather quickly. But the other areas like content businesses, Amazon businesses, there was some skepticism, and that was really that sort of icy look at the market was thawing before, and boy, it's gone now. Like the institutional money's looking at it saying, there's money here, and so just in like one space, the FBA space with Amazon, we're seeing right now over $4 billion raised just in a short amount of time for that one little sector alone, right? Perch just recently raised $750 million in their latest round. Thrasio's the fastest company ever to $1 billion valuation. And it's because they're looking at this with the pandemic and with this acceleration of the online world, plus a better sense for how to value these businesses and what makes them sustainable, and a certain maturity in the marketplace. All these things have kind of gone together and have caused just an explosion of buying activity, which has resulted in multiples being pushed up slightly, a lot more competitiveness on the deals, and again, a good environment for sellers. Now, I will add an asterisk here. These are not the highest multiples we've seen. The higher multiples, the higher multiples were frankly around the turn of the century. They were when I started Quiet Light, higher multiples existed, but that was a lot of ignorance. Frankly, that was happening. It was people not knowing how to value these businesses, and then we went through the Great Recession, and then we also combined that for people in the content space and SEO space. Google algo updates. We learned very quickly just how dangerous this can be, and then we got familiar with social media. And what a great source of traffic. And then all of a sudden, maybe this isn't the greatest to build an entire business on entirely, right? And so there was a lot of adjustment over the years where we're growing and maturing as businesses. We're not there yet. Of course, we're still all maturing, but we're a lot further along than we were 10 years ago.
I often think about it like the Wild Wild West. Each element has to go through its Wild Wild West moment. And like you were referring to there was the Google Wild Wild West when you never quite knew what was going to happen. There's been the Amazon kind of Wild Wild West, and then everything's maturing and it's more stable. So you're more sure now that if you buy one of these businesses, you can continue, that the stability is showing more.
I've been online long enough to remember when the Google Dance updates were the biggest event of the month, right? And people would be waiting. And fortunes were made and lost based on those updates. It was a fun time. It was there was like,
you say fun.
It was fun.
Depends
if you're on the
way.
right side. If you're on the right side, it could be really devastating. I had sites that were doing really well that got wiped out in a day, and that was the world. But it's the maturing. We're still, our relationship with the online world, it's in its infancy still, right? We're all still figuring this out, but we've come a long ways. And so to your original question, what's caused this? It's all these things going together.
It's a perfect storm. Yeah,
it is. It's the perfect storm.
So as you're seeing this all come together, and you've seen it evolve over this time, what business models or kind of online business models do you see are selling the fastest or for the highest multiples? What are those ones that really stand out?
SaaS has traditionally had the best multiples.
So we're going to say software as a service.
Software as a service, that's right. So if we were to break up, and maybe this is an unfair way to break this up, but I think it works pretty well. If we were to break the online world up into e-commerce, and e-commerce can branch further down, but let's just put everything where you're selling physical products into e-commerce. Content, which would be obviously ad supported or selling digital content of some sort. I love it too. It's where I got my start. And then software as a service would be another one. And then productized service would be maybe a fourth category, right?
Okay.
Software as a service has traditionally had the highest multiples out of this entire group. Content is there as well, and tends to receive some pretty high multiples and sometimes some outsized multiples. E-commerce tends to have the tightest multiple ranges. In other words, when we look at a scatter chart on where these things are being sold, e-commerce tends to be pretty well tied together.
So it's defined,
yeah, nice and defined. SaaS can be crazy high multiples. and it can be really low or unsellable, right? It spreads out pretty wide, and same with content as well. So traditionally, I mean, that's where we're seeing multiples, and right now we're seeing that too. But it transcends the business model. To be honest, we're all looking for sustainability and growth, right?
Yeah,
These
that's
are
a good one.
right, and these transcend the model, and so I would urge people thinking about this not to think in terms of, man, I got to start an e-commerce business. It's hot. FBA is hot. I got to do that. People care about what is going to be sustainable and what can grow. That's always going to be there. That doesn't change.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And then in terms of, I guess, like Quiet Light and what you guys specialize in, you obviously specialize in selling multi-million-dollar websites, but what's the general range of valuations or websites that you're selling? And then what's kind of the sweet spot for your buyer marketplace? So is it, I guess what I'm asking, are we talking $1 million websites, 5 million, 20 million? What, and has that changed in the last 12 months as well?
Yes, it's changed in the last 12 months. We're knocking on the door of the lower middle market, which would be, 10, 15, 20, $25 million transactions. We've done transactions that size range. Most of our team, most of the advisors love doing $1 to $5 million transactions. They're a lot of fun to do. The buyer market is very strong in the sub-$1 million range. So it's kind of hard to tack down where we would specialize. I generally say 250,000 to 25 million, but even with the 25 million, that's a bit of a false ceiling until we do something higher. And a lot more of it is, what is the business model itself? Because frankly, a buyer who can do a $25 million transaction often can do a $40 million transaction. And the guys who can do a $40 million transaction can probably do a 75 million. I mean, it expands pretty rapidly when you get up into the middle market as far as capabilities. But where are we doing deals right now? I can tell you, I mean, our median price is about 1.8 million, right? So that's where we're at for our median. A scatter chart would show probably some decent concentration in the high six-figure space, and $1 to $5 million range. But that's been rapidly changing.
So it's interesting in that space. Are you seeing, let's say if you were to start over right now and build a business in order to sell, is there any trends or opportunities that you see are kind of coming through now, or that you're seeing, okay, I think that's a good one for the future? Is there any insights that you have in that? Like if you were to start, would there be a particular business or website that you would go with, or topic or niche?
Yeah, there is, but it wouldn't be necessarily because I see it as the most appealing category. So let me answer personally versus where do I see the opportunities? Personally, I'm at a place right now with Quiet Light. We're growing rapidly. Our team is expanding rapidly. It's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of stress. And personally, I desire and crave some of the simplicity of the earlier days, right? So if I were to build something from scratch, I'd probably have an emphasis on simplicity because I like that. Not that it's not fun right now, it is, but it's been a lot of work to get here. And the next stages are also a lot of work. It's a ride that I think I'm going to enjoy riding once. Right? I'll enjoy it while I ride. So that's personal. As far as what are we seeing in the marketplace? What are things that are really appealing? The things that I often point people to would be hobbies that people have, loves that people have. So pets, my goodness, pets has always been popular, right? People love their pets. And right now there's firms out there that are specifically looking for pet-based businesses. You can expand beyond that. You can expand into other hobbies. So the second business I ever sold was selling aftermarket parts for Jeeps, for Jeeps and people that were doing off-roading in Jeeps. Those sort of industries have a lot of interest because people spend on their hobbies, and they spend kind of wildly at times, right? So there's always interest in that. The other characteristics that buyers love would be recurring revenue element. So subscription-based businesses that have good metrics, or consumable products. Supplements is it's a very popular category. It's got this love-hate relationship. Buyers either want it or they want to avoid it. There's not a lot of people that say, well, I'll look at it because it's super competitive. But if you're in the space and you know what you're doing, it's highly desirable, right? So you can expand beyond this and just say consumables, right? If you have a product that people grow loyal to, but then have to continually reorder, that's a good thing as well. So those are some ways that I like to think about it. You know, I love hobby niches like equestrian. We had this vein for a while where we were selling a bunch of equestrian sites, you know, horse lovers, you know, saddles. And classifieds, things like that, right? And people were, the interest we got on those was outsized because every buyer out there that had an equestrian hobby was like,
this is my passion too.
That's true.
Yeah,
exactly. So I love looking at the hobbies, but then the other elements would be just that recurring kind of predictable income. And then, you know, the business model itself, content and SaaS always get the attention. Content gets the attention because of really high margins. SaaS gets the attention because of the recurring revenue and the ability to expand and build on that recurring revenue.
Yeah. Awesome. That is awesome insights. And that's a really good way of looking at the marketplace. It gives you a different perspective of how you're kind of choosing.
And thank you, Mark, for mentioning the equestrian, the horse. I call the horse. I am constantly on at our high-level coaching clients here in Australia. Someone should do a big horse site here in Australia. We'll sell for millions. There you go, guys. You've just heard it from Mark himself. But I love the reason too, because the buyers are all into horses.
Yeah, I mean, some 5 million. You're appealing mostly to individuals, right? And so this is, you know, a very common profile of a buyer at that price range. Would be the executive who's maybe put in 30 years at a C-level job and is now thinking, you know what I want to do? I want to buy an RV and travel the country. I have enough to retire on, but I'd like an additional income. I still want to do something. And so they buy an online business because it gives them lifestyle flexibility while still giving them the ability to exercise those business muscles that they've developed over the years. Right. And so that's a really,
would you say that's an easier sale process to sell to an individual like that than selling to a big corporate or private equity or things like that?
Yes, it can be. Most of the time it is. So the benefits of selling to a corporate entity is the lack of emotion that can come in, right? So where that can be an advantage is if you're selling to a corporate entity when there's a problem, you can usually address the problem and they'll just look at it, you know, at face value. When you're dealing with a buyer who's an individual who is maybe putting in the retirement into it, it becomes much more emotional and there's a lot more defenses that they put up to protect themselves. So that part can be a little bit more difficult. Where it's more difficult to sell to a corporate entity is they are much more thorough. Their due diligence dig deep. I mean, really, really deep, to the point of being painful and long, and you can't believe how much work it is until you've been through it, right?
No, we can. We used to sell businesses to private equity, and
then they're smart bums and do EBIT grind, and suddenly the deal's almost there, and then suddenly it's not.
And there's another 6 months of due diligence that we need to do, and we need to go back over this, and please send us a folder of this. But I'd like to think the websites are way easier than that, but it sounds like
they are. I mean,
I think they're
comparatively speaking, they are.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're selling a $15 million business, you're still going to have a deep due diligence. You know, the process with a private equity, like when we did a few 20 million plus transactions, the due diligences on those took between 4 and 6 months to complete, beginning to end, right? So
so it's like a bricks and mortar.
Yeah. Well, once we get into that size,
Now that and actually, talking of due diligence and transaction times, say in that 1 to 5 mil range, and I'm just thinking of our community, also under the sub mil range, say, you know, 250,000 to $1 million. When you list these, actually, let's look at that one first. When you list these, how quickly are they selling? What can our sellers expect if they want to sell a website through you guys? What would be the process? Say it's going to sell for $500,000 or something. Is this a quick transaction in the current marketplace? If it's a good, say, I know that's a long piece of string, but say it's a genuine real site, you know, content site.
Yeah, right now it is. Right now it's pretty quick. The median time is 110 days, but if you actually plot it out, it looks like a two-humped camel, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
if you
Yeah.
take a look at it on a per day basis, there's a collection right around 45 to 60 days, which would be, you're typically looking at 1 to 2 weeks to settle on an offer, and you're usually looking at multiple offers that you get to select from. Like FBA, we're averaging over 4 offers per closed transaction. Non-FBA, we're at like 3.5, 3.6 offers per closed transaction. So it's still pretty strong numbers there. And then the due diligence, depending on how complex the business is and the funding mechanism behind it. Sub $1 million, most buyers are bringing their own cash, right?
Yep.
And that's a pretty quick process. So 30 days would be, for a content site, 30 days would be the expectation. We would push back on somebody that wants 60, 45 would be kind of the compromise if somebody really needs that. So pretty quick process.
And then that's just brought up something interesting, because most of our communities in Australia, I know in America with buying and selling businesses, funding is quite different in America to what we have available here in Australia. So you just mentioned, so obviously under $1 million, it's self-funded, but once you get in that 1 to 5 million with those ex-corporate executives, personal people, is it easy for them to get funding with websites, or do they get funding with websites? Or what are you seeing happening in that kind of a sale range?
Still usually cash that they have, especially if it's US based, then we have the option of SBA financing here in the US, but the company needs US based tax returns for that. So an Australian based company wouldn't qualify for that. So we would need to find a buyer that has the cash, and they exist. I mean, for a very long time with Quiet Light, we existed in an environment where no funding was possible because we were through the Great Recession. Nobody lent for online businesses. And we were still closing 7-figure transactions. So those buyers do exist. The volume is just lower there for that.
So what do you think the future holds? Where are we going next in website world?
As long as you take this interview down after a certain amount of time, right? So people can't come back and say how awful this was.
That's what I'm just going to say. It's just a fun question. We're not going to hold you to it. But
I think there's more growth in the market yet. Like there's
I think there's more growth to be had for sure. I mean, we're planning on more growth. I would not be surprised to see a minor pullback in buying activity as the current influx of cash settles down and companies either exit the space or settle into a vein that makes more sense for them, right? So we've seen an influx of cash into the FBA space. The problem is there's not that many businesses for sale, right? 4 billion by our count, and that might be low because that was a few months ago that I did that. So maybe it's 6 billion at this point. I don't know. It's a ridiculous number. There's not $6 billion worth of businesses for sale, and these companies have to deploy that capital. That's why they raised it. So they're going to start looking elsewhere. So what's going to happen? My guess is there will be something of a pullback in buying activity, but I don't think it's going anywhere. I mean, I think that pullback is not going to be a complete disappearance because the sector is still highly appealing. The multiples are still relatively low, especially as businesses understand and acquirers understand how to value these businesses better, right? If we're looking at multiples on EBITDA of 3, 4, or 5, that's a relatively low multiple, especially when compared with a business that gets a certain size. And we didn't talk about this, but this is a dynamic in this space, right? The larger the business, the higher the multiple because it's more stable business, right? So, Main Street businesses, sub-$1 million businesses will always have relatively lower multiples. But yes, I think there will be an increased activity in the marketplace in general, as far as the viability of the marketplace, and I think maturation as well. This has been something that has started from the day that I started Quiet Light, has been a maturation of the marketplace as we all learn how do you build a sustainable business in the online world. And that's occurred as people have learned how to bridge the gap from the online world into the physical world, how to build our businesses in a way that's more sustainable, and frankly, a marrying of the traditional brick and mortars world with the online world. And I think that process will continue, and we'll end up with something that looks a little bit different than what we have now.
Yeah. Exciting times.
That is awesome.
So, well, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us, Mark. We really appreciate you being here with us today. Now, if someone wants to find out more about Quiet Light, where should they go?
Quietlight.com. Super easy. We have a podcast as well. We talk a lot about this sort of stuff. When we bring on guests, we talk about buying and selling. Sometimes we bring on old clients to talk about their process of going through this. So that'd be, if you're into podcasts, highly encourage you to subscribe there. But if you want more information, quietlight.com. We have a lot of resources on the site.
Fantastic.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much again. And we'll look forward to, hopefully we'll be able to speak to you again soon. We'd love to hear some more of those stories.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.